welcome Yvonne Fuchs. It's so good to see you. Yvonne, I met Yvonne when she actually invested in Frugal, but subsequent to that, she did an amazing day workshop with us, which was based upon your book, What's the Difference That Makes the Difference, which I did actually think was invaluable and transformational in terms of how we saw the business and what it then became. So how did you get into this branding thing in the first place? I mean, what was it about branding, and we could talk about what that even means, but what was it that led you to working in this area?
About 25 years ago, I was employed by Business Link, which was a business advisory association for small businesses run by the government, as their lead advisor to creative businesses. And what I realized was that creatives were always talking about their brand, this and their brand that. And there'd been very little research into what brands actually were and how they work for small business. There'd been plenty on how they work in the corporate world, and we all knew brands like Mac or Apple or Unilever, Persil, but small brands didn't really understand how it worked, and it was all a bit of smoke and mirrors. So I was in the middle of an MA at the time, looking at design as a business strategy. And so I began to research it, and I developed as part of my MA dissertation what I called was the demystifying of branding methodology. And that went on to win quite a few business prizes because it really blew out of the window the smoke and mirrors that the big agencies were talking about. So that's how I got into it.
And do you think, I think it's always difficult for people, especially people that are sole traders, whether they're like jewelers or craftspeople or whatever, to think of themselves as a brand. I mean, what does it actually mean to be a brand, in your eyes anyway?
Well, the research that I undertook was with all the big branding agencies like Interbrand, Neuron Sorrel, all these massive branding agencies. And when I was talking to them, they would always talk in all these euphemisms. And I remember saying to one of the brand directors of Interbrand, so a brand's just like a person then, isn't it? And he looked at me and he was like, oh, I suppose you could say it is. And I've always said to people that what you do is what you do. You're a jeweler, you're a business advisor, you're a web designer. But the thing that makes you unique, and the reason that this book is called What's the Difference That Makes the Difference, is the fact that you doing that job or that profession are unique. And the difference that makes the difference, as you'll find through that workbook, is you are the difference with all your experience, with your personality, your values, and the way you operate. And it's that changes a business from just being a business to being a brand. And then you can develop that through all sorts of visual and communication strategies.
And do you think if you're not a particularly larger than life person, that's more challenging? Because I think when I think about that, being a brand, myself being a brand, I always think, do I need to be really confident to be a brand? Do I need to be really show-offy to be a brand? How does it manifest in a shy person, for instance? How can one go about those? What are the steps I need to take to discover what their uniqueness is? Because I always think that it's about uniqueness as well, but sometimes I think it takes a while to get to that point,
isn't it? It does. And the thing is, everybody's an extrovert. Some brands are very quiet. I've got some major clients over many years who are incredibly introverted, quiet people. Often creatives are very quiet. They might make beautiful work, but they spend a lot of time quietly beavering away in their workshop. But it's how they put themselves into what they do. There was a great Bananarama song many years ago, and it said, it ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. That's what gets results. And one of the ways that, even if you're a quiet person, if you offer very kind and supportive customer service, if you have a really nice way of wrapping your products when you send them out, that develops a relationship between you and the purchaser. And that's the bit that's not what you're doing, but it's the way that you're doing it. And it's nothing to do with extroversion or introversion. In this book, what I take you through is really looking at all the things that you love about yourself and what other people say about you. For instance, when I did this exercise myself, I was really surprised by the feedback from my clients. And my favorite piece of brand intelligence, as I call it, is everybody says you don't bullshit anybody. You're very straightforward, you're very kind, you're empathetic, you're insightful. And yeah, I might have known about those things myself, but I was a bit, because although I can do this sort of thing, I'm actually a really quiet and shy person deep down. But it's how I deliver the advice that I give that people care about. And when they're making a decision, there are thousands and thousands of business advisors and mentors like me. But how do people make a choice? And it's how they understand what you do, but they really want to know, how do you do it? And that's where it doesn't really matter your personality type, as long as people relate to it.
And I think it's really interesting that you use the example of wrapping something, because often when I think of branding, I think of like brands that spend thousands of pounds on logos and corporate identity. And like you read about Wolf Owens, I think it was, that redesigned the BT logo years ago for like a gazillion pounds, and the Olympics and all this stuff. So as you said, it's that nuance, isn't it? Sometimes it's the little things that you do, the tiny little things, the ribbon, the wrapping, the way you put something on a plate, something really small that can do that. So I think it's about understanding it doesn't have to cost you a lot of money, right? It's and what do you think are the other sort of, because I guess one of the things that I hear a lot is like people go, God, but it costs loads to get a logo done, doesn't it? And what are the sort of tips and tricks that you advise people when they're starting out, that you think, if you could just do this little bit, just this little bit?
I think, the reason that I wanted to demystify branding and all the work around it was because I realized that for small business, whether you're a startup or you're got one employee or you're self-employed or you're a freelancer, everybody needed to have a way to be recognized. And I have just done a little online group for teaching meditative stitching that I love to do as a hobby. And when I wanted to make something to recognize that this is Yvonne Fuchs's version of slow stitching, I went onto one of those free logo sites like Canva, and you can select a variety of little teensy-weensy circles and dotty things and typography, and you can make yourself a logo for free.
Yeah.
We've also got all these amazing websites like Fiverr where people will make you a logo. Yeah. But what I think it's important is, I always say a logo is like a flag.
Yeah.
It's good to have a flag that says, this is me. Another person doing the same as me might have a different flag. So, it's like countries. People need to know who's attached to what.
Yeah.
And therefore, there's now with the internet and everything that we have, there are a million apps. There are thousands and thousands of free things you can download. And, in the beginning, you just do what fits. If you get bigger and more money, then you can add more collateral to it. But what's the most important thing about a brand is that you understand yourself and you are true to yourself. And this is why the book that I wrote is like a workbook. You have to work through it.
Yeah.
Understanding how you operate as well as what you do, and defining that is not a quick fix. Doing yourself a logo can be done in 10 minutes. Working on what the offering is of the business, how clear is it? Even if you're a jeweler, there'll be loads of jewelers who make similar things to you. So another issue is how you're going to present that work.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Which method? So these things all build up over a period of time. And what you find is after a while, there becomes a bit of a custom and practice that people expect to see you in a certain way. And that is what we realize begins to define something. And then you keep repeating that so that people know it's you. So branding, the logo, the mark, the way you present yourself, a color that might be used, all become part of the signifier of this is the way I do things.
And do you think it's more important in the early stage to how important is a logo really at the early stage? Is it that important, or is it more important to actually get like the message right and to get other stuff right? If you were to say the most important thing you need to do to start with is X, what would X be? What's the one thing, if you didn't have to do anything else, what do you think is the one thing that absolutely you have to do?
Well, I'm sure many people have heard about a unique selling point or a proposition. I like to say that the very important thing you need to understand is what is your offer to the marketplace, but not just I am a business advisor. I am, but this is the way in which I offer my services and to whom. So the proposition or the offer is the thing you need to work on. And what you find is that over time you can iterate that, because things will change over time, and you'll find that the way you do things might be slightly different. I never used to do anything online. I'm now doing a lot more online due to the situation we're in. Yeah. But the way that I will give advice and support is very much fundamentally the same. And I can't say that was exactly what I worked on at the beginning, but over a period of time, it has iterated. So I think, yes, you need to get that offer nailed down. But then around it, you begin to build all the other things. And I can say a few more things that you can build.
You've said, can a person be a brand? So aside from a person, are there businesses, for instance, like if somebody decided to set up an accountancy business, like they're just an accountancy business, are there some things that are just like kind of difficult to actually differentiate yourself? Because actually an accountant, a small business accountant, as an example, is, well, just an accountant doing small business. I mean, are there some times where actually you just think, no, you're just a business, that you're can anybody be a brand?
I think that if you think of what the director of Interbrand said to me, well, it's just like a person, then I think everybody is a brand. It becomes more powerful when you add other things to it. And one of the things I like to say is that everybody has a story and a backstory. And I think when you start to engage with your public, for instance, I have a plumber friend, and actually, when you get to know his story, you realize why he does what he does. And part of it is to do with the fact that he loves to work with elderly people. And so he specializes in going out to help elderly people. And he always has a cup of tea and a piece of cake or a biscuit. And everybody calls him the friendly plumber, because his backstory is, I want to make sure that older people aren't ripped off. I want to, he's an older man. He was a young apprentice, probably with somewhere like British Gas years ago. But now he's gone on his own. He wants there to be more to himself. Yeah. And I certainly know with accountants, my accountant I've had for years and years and years. And he has a very particular way of helping his customers with their accounting. And he does everything from tiny people but to really quite big people. But this approach is what becomes the brand. And I suppose we shouldn't get too held up or hesitant about the word branding. I think you should think about, what's the difference about you? It's not, generally speaking, a unique selling point, but it is something that's the difference that makes a difference. Yeah. And the way you can do that is also in the way that you talk about things. The way that you communicate all the things you need to do. Certainly, we were talking about packaging, and some of the big brands really go to town on this. But if you think about a massive brand like Patagonia was started by an enthusiast, Ion Chopinard, who loved climbing. And what he did, he allowed his enthusiasm for climbing to enter into the business he ran. And what he realized was that if he made items, and he used to make gear for climbing as well as clothing, that polluted the environment, then he would lose the environment that he loved. So the premise underneath his business became, everything I do will do least harm to the environment. And so it doesn't matter if you're a one-man band, you will have a set of values that are really important. And I think the times that we're in now, if you begin to talk about why you do things, what you're doing to sort of manifest that or show that, people get interested, because there's so much choice. Why would you choose one person above another?
Yeah, absolutely.
Usually it's something that people read about you or see about you and go, oh, I want to be part of that.
And I think it's interesting that you say about it's more than just about the person. It's also about how what your value system is, because, when you look at so many brands now and why people are buying certain products over another, like Method, for instance, the kitchen company that does disinfectants and kitchen sprays, which I've got one over there. People buy that because it's supposed to be better for the environment. And so people are generally making decisions about purchasing now beyond just kind of the way something looks or whether it's cool or not, but actually, as you say, whether or not it's going to harm the environment, whether they're going to be supporting an organization that helps underserved, communities or different types of people. So I think there's, again, for people that are perhaps not that comfortable sharing their own story, sometimes I think as well, when I look at in the School of Social Entrepreneurs, what I noticed sometimes with people setting up social enterprises was often it sprung from their own experience, right? It was because they saw something terrible in the world that had happened mainly to them, and they knew other people that the same thing had happened to, domestic abuse or, baby loss or whatever it happened to be, and they wanted to solve that. But often that story was so deep for them and so emotional, but actually the only way they could sell it was by actually sort of taking a little step back from it, because if they got too involved, they just ended up crying all the time. And I think there is a point with some people where, I mean, I know when we worked together, it got really emotional sometimes working with people that really needed a lot of help. And sometimes you have to almost reframe the story so that it becomes wider than just yourself, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. And I think also you're right when you say that people now have the opportunity to purchase from many, many people. And some people just impulsively buy because they like the look of something. But we do believe these days that shoppers for absolutely everything from toothpaste to accountants to lawyers, they look for more than is just obvious. And so if you're talking about brand stories, which is a very important part of a communication strategy, part of what that is the testimonials of people who have worked with the person or developed a relationship with that person. And in my own new website, the designers decided to tell my story through the words of my clients. And I think that was really great because then I didn't have to talk about myself all the time, which I find a bit, But I think the other thing is that as you get deeper into a business and you form relationships with your customers, they begin to give you feedback. And so iteration happens. So you might think you're going out on this particular ticket or this is the thing that you're about. But what you find is with time, the more relationships you have, and let's be clear that business is about transactions between people and things, or people and services. As those transactions happen, you then begin to get more feedback about what's being experienced by your customers, and therefore you can make changes. You can do something less, you can do something more, and therefore what the thing that we know is that the brand values, generally speaking, will be the same, but some of the communications will be different. I certainly know in all the businesses that I've been in business since I was 20, that's over 43 years, and I know that over that period of time I've changed, but fundamentally the essence of who I am has not changed. So what I might be doing now is different, but very, very interesting, the things that I've always believed in, I still believe in. So I think the other thing you have to ask yourself is, why were brands invented? Those of you who love the series Mad Men will understand that the advertising industry sort of created brands for a good reason, and that what they wanted was a consistent buying opportunity for that particular product. So they created slogans and thoughts about something, it could be something, it washes the whitest, whatever. And they were tapping in to what the purchaser, the customer, they thought wanted. Now, that is still very current now. If you're a small business, the more you listen to your customers and the more you dialogue with them, the more you will realize what they want, how they want to receive that, and then what you're going to do about it. So, what is interesting is a brand isn't static. No. And as you develop your thinking and you trade, what you find is you enter into a dialogue and a relationship, and then things evolve. And that's why it's quite dynamic. And, you have to think these things through. You can't just, I always, the slogan on my old website used to be, brands, they're not just about logos. And this is why a lot of people think, do I need a logo? Well, I say, it's good to have a flag so people can identify you. But what you've really got to work on is all this back end stuff and this thinking. And that's why, working with my book, that's why I wrote that book, so that people have a manual to work through the thinking, because at the end, you've then got a roadmap.
And do you think, I was listening to somebody talking the other day, it was some creative person, and he said, and I think, I do see this more and more, we're so used now to seeing good design everywhere, just everywhere, right? That actually the public has become really literate in what makes good design, right? Whereas back in the days, there was all sorts of stuff, and maybe there wasn't that design literacy that we're now familiar with. He said, and I do subscribe to this to a certain extent, that you have to over-design. You have to overspend on the creative, is what he said. He said, because people are used to everything now looking good. And I think part of that is easier than ever because of Squarespace and Wix and sites that actually just create beautiful looking templates. So you can go bing, bing, I love that color, change this, change that, and it still looks really good. But I think what all those sites are acknowledging is like, people do want stuff to look good.
Yeah, and I think it depends what your brand is. I always say to people that that my business advising and mentoring website has a particular look and feel because that's what it's about. But the other sort of things that I do, which are more like my hobbies, which are much more person to person, my living room to your living room, they don't look so slick because what you don't want to do is to get that messaging wrong. Some people so over design things that it could have been done by anybody, so you lose all personality out of it. So you've got to find the middle path in these things. Certain things you will want much more slick, and other things you won't. But there is a backlash about over slickness, and things have got to be legible. Of course, they have to be, and they have to be coherent. But neither do people want to be hoodwinked by some fantastic shop front, and then once they get in, there's no deep value. So in the end, a business has to deliver on what it says it's going to deliver. And the whole reason to have a brand is to really make sure that you are being very, very consistent in what you do and how you do it. This is how, when the Mad Men created the ideas for campaigns, what they tried to keep doing was to make sure that people would buy and buy and buy again, because they knew that the product would be consistent. And it doesn't matter whether you're doing a piece of jewellery or making, vegan chocolate or offering a service, people need to know that they're going to get a consistency. And that's why you have to think through what exactly is it that I'm offering, and so that you're clear about that, so that when you go to market with it, then there is that clarity. And I think that's the key to branding. It's not the logo or the look, that's part of it, but it's the thinking that you put in behind it. Because what we know, and this is incredibly well researched, as you grow a business, your customer base becomes your value add. And what you do and how you do it is very, very important. And if you want to grow a business, you have to be consistent. And the more that research is done to this, people who are consistent, people who take care of their customers, people who have a really personable way of relating, those are the businesses that grow. And I don't think there's anybody on the planet hates bad service. And so small businesses have a really great way and a great opportunity to give great service consistently. And so that's how small businesses become medium-sized businesses, become big businesses.
That is a fantastic way to conclude this. Everybody wants reliability, don't they?
They do.
And if they don't get it, then they get very upset.
Yeah.
And I have a whole nother story about my building works that I could add to that, but I won't, because that will just get too depressing. So thank you so much. That was brilliant. And you can hold your book up again, and we'll also have a link to it. It's a brilliant book, and it's not just a book, but it's actually, as Yvonne said, it's actually a workbake. So the great thing about it is
you can write lots of things in it and review them.
Write in it. Like
old
old-fashioned way. You can write stuff in it. Thank you.